else to add to that. Since you mentioned that my husband was a pastor, I will say that I had a discussion with him last night. My first ever in-person demo was like 2 or 3 weeks ago with the Illinois Watercolor Society. I was scared to death. And so I was like, well, what was it like for you when you gave your first sermon? And he's like, oh, it was totally cringe. It's like I was sitting there and I could hardly even like think of what words to say. He's like, oh, this professor was in the congregation, this professor's in the congregation. He's like, I felt sorry for inflicting that kind of torture on. So and now I feel very much like him with my microphone on and in front of a bunch of people. But yeah, so my background, I obviously I grew up with the artist as my mom. Something that I should probably update since that was information from 10 years ago is since then she was diagnosed with dementia and she actually passed away last summer. So, but it's something that was really neat to see during her cognitive decline was that artist part of her was still very much there. It was just different. She couldn't sit down and paint anymore, but I remember we'd go for walks together and she would see like flowers that she'd probably want to paint. She'd just pick up and then she'd take them home and place them throughout the house. And I think that was her art, you know, even in the midst of the depths of her dementia, she still had that as a part of her. So I just think that that's important for us all to remember. Like, you don't have to be a star artist. You don't have to get into these big shows. It's just about you, and your person and how you respond to the world around you and just doing, what you're supposed to do. So, um, yeah. So now that we've mentioned my husband's a pastor, I can kind of explain my odd history of where I've lived. Uh, when we first got married, his first parish was in rural Nebraska. So there wasn't really, it was like an artist wasteland for me. There wasn't any organizations like this for me to go to. But I always made sure I had a space to work in the house. And I've always been very protective of my painting time, even in the midst of having small children and raising a family. I always find time to paint. Um, and then when we moved here, which would explain why I'm living in Marengo, it's where he's a pastor at. I don't know why else I would be living in Marengo, but getting familiar with the Lakes Region Watercolor Guild, the Illinois Watercolor Society, that's just been a great trove of information and learning. And I love coming to these meetings. And I feel like no matter who demonstrates, every time I learn something. So that's been really great. Gosh, I don't know where to start here. I'm going to do a demo of tomatoes because I thought maybe that would be an easy thing to demonstrate. A few weeks ago, my first demo ever, I think I did way too large of painting. I'm trying to scale back today. But something I've started doing that kind of came about from, I had to take a graduate class last spring to reactivate my teaching license. So I thought, I have to take a college credit class. I'll sign up for a graduate painting class because then I'll get to do painting. It'll be easier than, typing papers and stuff. It was actually really, really hard. But I did learn a lot. The instructor kind of pushed me to do painting from life, which is really intimidating and a lot harder than working from a photograph. But I found that that's become kind of a helpful part of my painting process. To just what I've started doing the last couple of paintings is if there's an object in my painting, I take it from life and practice painting it from life. And it just kind of gives me a better understanding of the form and the color. And I think I've had better paintings as a result of that. And something else I'm going to start doing on a regular basis, how many of you guys were here for the demo last month with Steve Puttridge? And that paper that he talked about, that stipple paper for drawing on, it's just exactly what I needed because I think drawing the subject is such good preparation for painting, but it was always so boring for me. I couldn't stand it. So I just like blindly dive into a painting, but it has been helpful it's made the drawing process a little bit more enjoyable. Just that texture change helped. And so it's just kind of helpful in painting preparation, and then also as you get into the final stages of the painting to kind of be able to check your value and design against the sketch that you did. So that's what I did here. Um, it has to be good, right? I think you got to kind of let go of that a little bit. You know, it's just a sketch, right? Doesn't matter if it's fantastic. And it's also okay to have bad paintings. I think that a lot of people are scared when they sit down to paint watercolor that they're going to mess it up. And that fear is what kind of holds you back. So I mean, it's okay to have bad paintings. When I was having to sit down and paint from life and then show a bunch of MFA students my paintings from life at the next critique, that was pretty intimidating. But I don't know, just give yourself permission to have a bad painting. You're still learning something.
Around that page, we could be.
Yeah, well, yeah, and he had this pad. Steve had this pad here last week too. So anyway, it's called stipple paper. If you didn't take a picture of it, it has like a tiger on the front. It's just I would compare it to like if you were drawing with paper on top of a table, and then the texture, the stipple texture of the countertop kind of comes through the drawing. It's just enough of a texture change to make it more interesting for me. So a lot of what I've learned from color has come from this book, Making Color Sing, which is a really helpful book, especially like painting greens. There's a lot of really good information. So I've been working through that and trying to have that help inform my paintings.
Put it on your board so
yeah. Thanks, Christy. Okay, so we're gonna get started. I kind of have been doing practice runs at home, figuring out where's the best place to start so that things will dry at certain times while I'm painting other things. Then I can go back into other things. These large paintings that I do take 14 to 20 hours total to complete. And it's really more of a relaxing time for me. I'm not in a rush. I don't usually use a hair dryer because what's the rush? You know, if I need to have something dry, I'll walk away for the day. And then I can kind of think in my head about the painting throughout the day. Just that walking away, reflecting, coming back, walking away, reflecting is just a really good part of my painting process. So I'm going to start with these green stems first on the tomatoes. Seems to be a good place to start. And just kind of like mixing up a cooler green color. Toning it down with a little bit of a red. That'll be my initial wash on these.
All right, you just
Trying to get to a comfortable position. Painting in front of people, that's fun. I know, yeah, pretend you're not there with my microphone. Yeah, this is Viridian, which is a really nice transparent green, but you do need to tone it down with a little bit of red, especially if you're painting anything natural.
Do you usually paint on a slant?
Yes, I paint on a drafting table, and I think that's important. Just that slight slant is really important to get the paint kind of moving, especially when you're laying washes and stuff. You really want to have gravity kind of working with you. So stretching paper. I was kind of on the fence about stretching paper for a little while. I will soak it for 3 minutes. This is 140-pound Saunders Waterford. And I'll soak it for like 2 or 3 minutes, pull it out, stretch it to a board. And I just kind of was experimenting, like stretching versus not stretching versus soaking it for a longer period of time. And I started soaking it for a longer period of time, and I didn't really like, I don't know, it's just, I think that as an artist, you just kind of like get it used to your paper and how it absorbs the paint. And so then when you change something, it starts absorbing the paint a little differently. It kind of throws you off. So I noticed that if I soaked it for a longer time, the flat washes that I wanted to lay weren't laying down as well as they were before. So then I thought, well, maybe I'm going to try not soaking it at all and just painting on unstretched paper. And I did that, but again, like it's something just wasn't quite right. So I thought, well, I'll experiment and see what it's like stretching it for soaking it for 3 minutes again and stretching it, see if that makes any difference. And it did. So I think I'm gonna do that from now on. But I think it's important to experiment, like
The wet paper with tape.
staples.
Yeah, those-
I do the staples, which then you have staple marks, and then you got to be careful when you're matting it so that the staple marks don't show. Um, I've taped this one just because I kind of like the idea of covering up the staple marks and having like a border, but the point is just experimenting, like I think that's important. Try different things, experiment. You're not going to learn what works better if you don't try different things.
You do that like the day before and let it.
Yeah, the night before. Like I'm not in a rush. What's the rush? If I don't have paper ready, then I can draw stuff or sometimes I'll work on two paintings at once. Okay.
Or something like.
So just like over the course of all of my learning, going to the library and looking for books to read, and I came across Ann Pember, who does a lot of floral watercolors, and read through her book, and she had some different papers that she used. So I tried Arches, and then I tried Saunders Waterford, and it worked better for me because I feel like Saunders was a little bit more forgiving than Arches, in that like you can lift stuff out a little bit better. Saunders Waterford, and I actually started getting the high white paper just because once I got the high white, then the other stuff looked yellowish, and that kind of bothered me. Okay, so what I'm doing right now, I never really leave just stark white. I always try to tone it a little bit with the color. And that's one of the lessons in this book. Um, I'm looking at like the shadows, right? And kind of what color would that white be? And the shadows are kind of a grayish greenish color, right? And so to accentuate that, I'm laying a really pale wash of red. I actually meant first one I did cadmium because it was a little warmer, so we'll try it. And that slight wash will really help with the sense of light in the painting and color. And you won't really even be able to tell that it's reddish at the end. So I'm laying that down. And I'm going to start, well, this is what working in some of that shadow color. And I have a separate palette over here. When I am doing neutrals or shadows, I feel like switching to a triad is really helpful instead of trying to decide what to make over here. So this is kind of a greenish, grayish color. And you can't really see this palette here. And just to have a bigger space to kind of mix those neutral colors.
What's the triad?
It is cobalt blue, quin rose, and aureolin yellow. Just kind of laying in some of those shadows here. I'm not going to worry about these sharp shadows right now. I'm gonna put those in later. Just kind of trying to define the form of the cloth right now a little bit. All the paper's still wet. This is starting to dry.
Did you use such a small brush for your first wash?
What, this one?
The little flat one that you have?
This is just adding shadows, and this is like my best friend, this brush. It's a size 8 Fable, and I like it because it's just big enough, but then you can also get like a nice tip.
Is that the flat one you were just using?
This is just like a cat's tongue. It's from Mary White. Like, she lists it on her website as one of the brushes she uses. It's soft. It holds a lot of water. This is nice for laying kind of big washes down. I'm gonna clean some stuff up here. This is we're not used to cleaning. Sorry. David's got to adjust the camera here. Okay. All right. So I got that in basically. One thing that was helpful, the last painting I did with a lot of fabric designs is just to kind of, well, it's still wet, drop in a few of these little, you know, colors to hint at that pattern. Then I'll add more in later.
So in most of your paintings, do you do the background first?
I work them at the same time. I would say like my backgrounds and foregrounds are kind of woven together. I don't know. I've seen, some people do all the background first, and that's fine for them. That never really worked well for me. Um, the painting is a little bit more unified when I work them together. The reason this paint that I'm putting down on this wet wash isn't going everywhere is because I've taken just enough moisture out of the brush to maintain that wet into wet control. And a good way to do that is just to tap the excess off on a paper towel. Because once this is more saturated than the paper, then you're going to start getting blooms and messes and stuff. All right. Things are starting to get a little bit dry over here, so now it's more like working wet on the dry. This is cobalt teal blue, which works well kind of for these more aqua type of flowers. And it also really makes a nice purple if you mix it with Quinn Rose.
In cobalt.
Quinn, yeah, I am working from a photo. Sorry, can't really. Yeah, sorry.
So did you set up this still life?
I did, yeah, and this was another thing that came out of the graduate class that I took, because before I was making like, I was basically going and taking pictures of flowers out in nature and then trying to crop those to make an interesting design. And the instructor was kind of, I don't think she liked that. So anyway, so she was pushing me to like paint from life, which I really hadn't done in a long time, because it's just, you know, I work for photographs. That's what I do. You know, painting from life is hard. I might have a bad painting. So I started just kind of practicing those, just things around the house, and then setting them on interesting fabrics. Sorry, I'm trying to think here. And then I got the idea of, well, what if I set up a still life and then photographed it? And I started kind of doing that, and then just over the course of the summer, it's been, I like setting up still lifes with the flowers, and then also just like things that were significant to me from my parents' house, things that remind me of my mom. So like some of those are vases that she gave me when I was little to put flowers in. They were just kind of around the house. I don't know. I really am enjoying painting with those kind of significant objects added in to like the floral part of it too. All right, so now I'm going to work these tomatoes, and that's going to be a wet into wet wash. And one thing I do when I have a section that I want to work wet into wet is I'll prime the paper. Okay, so like I'll wet it down first, let the shine kind of soak in, wet it down again, and that's going to extend my wet into wet working time, and it's also going to keep the paper evenly damp so that I can lay in those washes. And trying to decide if I want to work, I'll work this hole in my dough. It's all kind of a time thing, and you'll see why. My working time, as long as the paper is shiny, I can work. Once that shine starts to disappear, that working time is now coming to an end, and I need to let that dry completely before going back into it. So this first wash that I'm going to lay is pretty much just describing the light on the form. So we look at the highlights. Those are really cool, almost like a cobalt blue I would use for those highlights. And then as the form kind of turns away from the light, the color temperature becomes warmer. And so then I just kind of will build that wash, starting with transparent colors and then working towards more intense staining colors. So I can see this wash is starting to soak in over here. And while that's soaking in, I may start wetting another area just to kind of get that started. I really like using these soft brushes to lay these initial washes down, and then if I need more control, I'll switch to synthetic, like stiffer synthetic brushes. And sometimes I do use masking fluid. I opted not to today just because it would have only been for like some tiny spots. I'll really only use masking fluid if it's more effective than painting around the shape. I think that once I discovered masking fluid years ago, it's like, oh man, now I can do all this stuff. I can, and it's too much. I think that you can really overuse masking fluid and then it doesn't look very good. So like I said, painting the negative shapes, painting around is better when you can do that. Sometimes there's such tiny little details like stamens of flowers or things that I just need to work separately, and masking fluid is helpful to kind of mask those areas out and then paint into them later. Okay, so now we're ready to remove this. A nice kind of pale cobalt blue to describe those highlights.
So even on flowers, you don't leave the highlights white?
I think it's more effective to tone it, even a pale wash. That and just and like creating that color contrast, even like a temperature contrast will emphasize that a little bit more. I mean, you don't have to, but I found that to be pretty effective for me. And it's more interesting than just, I don't know, say, oh, this is plain white. No, there's a little bit of a color to it.
Can you tell us more about the brand of paints that you like?
So, I don't know if it's so much about the brand as it is consistency in pigments between brands. So I started using this color palette that Jean Dobie has in her book. And a lot of it is either Winsor Newton or Daniel Smith. And I think mostly what I have on my palette now is Daniel Smith. This light red is Holbein. I had a tube of that, and I actually like that light red a little bit better than whatever Winsor Newton or whatever I was using. But the thing you have to be careful about is some the pigments themselves will differ between brands. So like Oriole Yellow, Winsor Newton is pretty much identical to Daniel Smith Oriole Yellow, but I can't guarantee that another brand is going to be the same. And sometimes it's a different pigment from a different brand equals a different pigment from another brand. So like alizarin crimson, right? The permanent alizarin crimson for Winsor Newton. I think that a better equivalent is not the Daniel Smith alizarin crimson, but the Daniel Smith anthraquinoid red. So anthraquinoid red. Okay, so you can see like it's starting to define the form a little bit. So now we're going to start heating up the yellow. And Oriolan is a nice, cool yellow temperature. You can't get it very strong. It's transparent. It's really good for mixing stuff. But when I need a more intense yellow pigment, I would go to cadmium yellow, which cadmium yellow is, if I ruin a painting, it's with cadmium yellow or cadmium red because it's so opaque. And with the way that I work, laying washes on top of the other, it's just really easy to go too opaque with the cadmium and then just have it totally destroy the painting. So what I started using instead was Daniel Smith Hansa Yellow Medium, which really gives you that nice, intense, warm yellow, but it seems to be a little bit more transparent, a little bit more fluid. The other thing I noticed about cadmium pigments when I was kind of experimenting, something I'll do when I'm trying to think about what pigments to use before painting is I'll experiment on a scrap sheet of paper and just kind of see how they flow into each other. And I found out that the cadmium red um, didn't really flow into the other colors. It just kind of sat there. And I think it's because it's such a heavy metal pigment. Um, so I've switched away from cadmiums on my palette to Hansa Yellow Medium and then also Scarlet Lake instead of cadmium red medium. And for the really intense reds, I'm going to go to Pyrrole for the really, really intense reds. Just when you paint a lot of flowers and stuff, you really need those intense pigments that you can't mix all the time. All right. This is Scarlet Lake here. All right, my working time is rapidly coming to a close on some of this. Try to, it's not going to flow as easily. To back into it here. Sometimes it break whenever you want. Oh well, no, I'm good. I'm good for now. And I like to use this kind of to correct washes sometimes. It's just a dry, really dry, what is this? Hake brush. If things aren't like flowing into other colors with it, I want them to, that can kind of help to correct that. Smooth it out a little bit. If this is still wet enough, I think I can. Get it here, get some of this taken care of. Yeah, this brush is really great because it can kind of get into those little spaces. But then it's big enough and it holds enough water that you can cover other areas too. I was using Escoda Prado brushes, but I'm so brutal on my brushes because I really like to scrub the pigments out of the palette. And I think it's probably because when I started painting when I was younger, it was with pan watercolor paints. And that's just kind of, what I got used to, and you dig into them. And so I was doing that with the Escoda brushes. I really liked the point and they held a lot of water, but then the points would just deteriorate so fast. And it's because I was scrubbing into the paint. And I guess I could have changed that, but how do you change something that's that ingrained? Like I've been painting on my own independently since I was like 12 years old. I remember, and this was part of, having an artist mom. She would always make sure I had paints and brushes and I'd paint in my bedroom and be very careful not to knock the water over because I knew if I spilled on the carpet, that would have been the end of my experimenting. But that's how long I've been, doing this for. And to say like, oh, I need to activate my paints with a different brush is just, I can't do it. I'm stuck. So yeah, and I don't know, the sables hold up a little bit better as far as scrubbing into your dried pigments. But some artists that have demonstrated here are all about using like the fresh pigments, which I don't know. I don't always. Sometimes I will, but all right, now we'll start working this tomato. I have no idea what time it is, so let me know when it's like
22.
okay. Well, I'm gonna get the initial washes in for this, and then we can take a break, and that'll be good because then I can kind of use a hair dryer to dry these up so I can go into it again. Eventually, so I build washes after washes. So like I'll do the same process with this. Once it's totally dry, then I can wet it down and build another wash on top of it. Eventually there comes a point when you're, I think, building too much pigment and you start wetting it down and you're lifting pigment. So you switch to like softer brushes, but there is a limit to how many times you can go into it. Um, Switch back to my L'Oreal and yellow. I started with these lighter washes, a little bit more forgiving when I get up into these areas where the stems are. I know another criticism I had in that graduate class was pencil lines. She didn't like my pencil lines showing. So I'm a little bit self-conscious of that. I try a little harder to hide them, but you know, like, the expectation was that I would just like sit down with paint and a brush and not need to do any preliminary drawing at all. I don't know. Maybe that's what oil painters do. I don't know. You paint oils, right? A little bit, not really. I don't know how to paint with oils. I never really learned. Um, that's that's the truth. When I was in college, it was acrylic paints. So I learned with that, but then I found like on my own post college when I paint with acrylics, it's like I was trying to get it to do what watercolor would do. You know, like if it would build up too much on the canvas and I couldn't see the surface of the canvas anymore, then I didn't like that. And I'm like, maybe I should just stick with watercolor. And then also like throughout, having kids and babies and my painting time then became when um it was nap time where they were sleeping. Like all I have to do to clean up is just rinse my brush off and then I can go, get crying baby from her nap or whatever. So it's just
How have you dealt with your children wanting to paint with your paints?
they don't really.
Wow.
Because let's be honest, these are artist pigments and I had like cadmium and cobalt and those aren't really safe for
Well, I
them
know
to
I'm just
use.
thinking with my own kids. I had watercolors for them, but they wanted mine. So
It was with me and my mom. Okay. And she had some tubes of paint. I don't know, back in the 90s, they must have still been making watercolor paint with lead. I don't know. It was still.
Well, the tubes are.
And so I found, well, no, one pigment was like lead something, but she would let me use that. I don't know.
I just think it's amazing that you were able to paint with with small children.
It's such a part of who I am. And I like when I had my babies, I did let myself take, 6 weeks. 6 weeks off. And it's a little bit leaner, but yeah, I don't know. I just have always found time to do that. I've always been really protective of, making sure that I have some time to paint. And now it's really nice because my 3-year-old is in preschool. So then I have that time every morning, and I don't have to stay up until like 10 o'clock at night to get my painting time in, which I used.
Children like to paint.
My oldest likes to draw. It's been interesting with her because she's such a perfectionist. And sometimes I worry like she looks at what I do and thinks that that's what she should also be able to
They all
do.
do that.
You know, and so I've been trying to really just, I think the biggest thing, and I have an art education background, okay? So the biggest thing with kids, I think, is to just let them explore. You know, like I give her the supplies and just to let her explore on her own. I think that's really important for little kids, especially. And so she draws. I don't know I think it's more like creativity maybe that just runs in my
Yes.
family because my middle child really likes to um, write stories. She makes these little books and she writes these stories, and they're actually really good. They have like a beginning and a middle and an end, and they're really interesting. I'm gonna start. Well, let me think here. Why don't we take a break? If it's break time, okay, we'll take a break. I'll try to dry this off, and then I'll be ready to get going. When you have a cool light source, the shadows are going to be warm, except for where the edge of the shadow meets the sunlight, and that's going to be cool. So I need to kind of, sometimes I'll mix up a gray out of these, this triad here. So I have like a cooler version of it, and then up here I kind of will add a little bit more red to warm that up. You make it a little bit more greenish, grayish here. Tone it down.
Say that again about the shade, the shadow, and the warm.
Okay, so like this is a cool light source with outside sunlight, which is how I like to do a lot of my subjects. The highlights are cool, and the shadows are primarily warm, except for at the edge where it meets the sunlight will be cooler. And so as I'm mixing up these neutral colors, the nice thing about this triad is I can shift it any direction that I want it to go. I can shift it more red, I can shift it more yellow, I can shift it warm or cool. So that's what I'm going to do. I need to darken this shadow up here. It's not nearly dark enough. So I'll wet it down. I don't know if I'll I don't always prime things. It's just when I need a little bit more control working wet into wet, I'll prime stuff. But here I'm just going to go over it and start darkening that shadow up a little bit.
You said that the shadows would be warm when the light is cool, except around the edge.
Yeah, she talks extensively about that in this book, where you have this sharp edge.
Okay.
Where it meets that sunlight, it shifts slightly more cool.
Okay.
So this is a pretty deep shadow up here. So I'm going to push a little bit more warmth into that.
What colors again?
Aureolin yellow, cobalt, blue, and quin rose. No, that's what it is. Streaky yellow. Sometimes you kind of have to embrace a little bit of the imperfections. Because it's a painting, right? You're not wanting to copy the photograph exactly. This is still a painting. So sometimes it's kind of nice to see those slight imperfections. I'm building these shadows in here before I build the pattern on the fabric. I found that it's better to go over the top after the shadows are kind of built up and then develop those patterns, because otherwise things will lift too much. got a lot of yellow in there. I wouldn't prime this one at all. I can get this section just wetted to dry, I think, evenly enough. Okay, so here's an example. I'm going to shift this now cooler as this edge kind of meets the sunlight. All right, let's start building up these reds a little bit more. I'm gonna try a section off. Someone was asking me if I always do the whole thing at once. I kind of will wet what I think I can work all in one cycle. I don't want to bite off more than I can chew. And I'll come down here and maybe do this one too. Get that started. See, I'm already lifting some color, and that's part of like the importance of really letting that pigment set in before you go in for that second wash, which obviously when I'm at home, it's like, okay, I've painted for 2 or 3 hours, I'm done for the day. And then when I come in maybe later that evening, things are well enough set that I can just wet down the surface again and not worry about pigment lifting.
So do you feel that letting it sit for that period of time sets it better than you did with your hair?
Yes, I do. I do. And like I said, like for me, why would I be in such a rush that I need to use a hair dryer? I think it's more effective, if I have another painting that I can work on. Or maybe just if I've been painting for 2 hours, taking a break. That's just how I work. Okay. Not everybody works that way.
So when you added the water to start working on your second wash, did you add the water twice or
Just once for this, because if I go into it twice, I risk lifting that pigment. If it's a really pale wash, I could probably do that, but and also there's a little bit more of a time constraint today, so. Start to lift kind of that pigment now too. That's okay. Things are soaking in here. Maybe I should have wet it down twice. Yeah, see, now I'm really. With my magic brush, so sometimes this helps to kind of stop the moisture. Oops. I know. That's why I finished a nice one yesterday. All right, let's see. I'm gonna go back up here. So this is soaked in. yeah, everything's kind of spreading weird over there now. It's great, but so yeah, this one I am soaking a second time. Hopefully this will make things go a little bit better.
So did you ever tell your mom what this teacher was telling you?
She wasn't cognitively able to understand by the time I learned all this.
How old was she?
So she was first, we started noticing signs of it when she was 61, and she died at 71. So it was really, you know, a fast moving, devastating kind of thing to watch. They think we never had her like actually diagnose what type it was because we couldn't get her into the doctor, and she wouldn't have tolerated tests by the time we did get her into the doctor. But they think it was a mix of dementia with Lewy bodies and then another kind. So it was really, really hard. And a lot of people either know somebody or have somebody in their family that are dealing with this and just don't talk about it, you know. I guarantee there's somebody in this room that knows somebody who's dealing with this right
Both
now.
parents.
Both parents.
I feel like we're in the magic stage from what I can do to what you're now making into. Like,
This got all messed up. And sometimes it's good, like if I notice things are starting to get kind of messed up, then you really got to walk away and let it just totally dry. And then sometimes you can fix it by going in with a wash on top of it after it's dry. But this is where the patience thing comes in, you know, like I think that's one of the things about painting in watercolors, just learning to be patient, right? Like it takes a while for things to start coming together. You just have to be patient and not be in a rush, maybe. And maybe say that it's okay if you have a bad painting, right?
so the second one is making things differently than the first one because the water is big enough that you're good.
What do you mean? Second wash? This one, no, I think I wet it down before the pigment was totally set in. And I didn't wet it down twice. So like I was working and part of it is drying to the point where I can't work it anymore and then things are kind of just spreading. But you know, maybe it's good that I messed that up because then you guys can see what it looks like.
And I messed up.
Okay, so I'm gonna start trying to go in and do these greens now. So I'm gonna wet this whole section down. So I started with what my highlight color would be, which is a cool green, okay? And I'm going to work on the next kind of level of modeling, form, rendering, halftones, I don't know, which is gonna be a darker, warmer green. Okay, so I'm gonna take a more staining color green, that's stronger pigment, tone it down with some red.
What green?
This is phthalo green, yellow shade. Tone it down with some red and then add some yellow in there. And I might switch to a different brush at this point. Too much red. Great. So I'm looking now where the next lightest color is. This is all soaked in. I'll wet it down again. So everything that is not that lightest color green is going to get this warm kind of a color added to it.
Did you ever take printmaking?
Yes, when I was in college, I took printmaking. I actually, after college, I made my own silk screen.
I see some of that.
And did that a little bit. Well, yeah, there's a lot of like comparisons with printmaking and then working in watercolor because there is kind of that idea of layering and transparency and
Moving the light color. and-
yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go in this whole dark with this green. Instead of just leaving it then adding that brown, and I feel like it's better to like paint through to those darker values. Okay, now I'm gonna go in with my darkest. This is that anthraquinoid red mixed with phthalo green, and that you can get a really nice black with that. And the nice thing about mixing that black is that I can shift it warm or cool depending upon the ratio of the green and the red. Okay, so I'm going to add those darkest parts to this now. You know, the other nice thing about watercolor, I feel like that helped me to kind of maintain working my artwork post college is because it's really easy to set up. Like you don't need a lot of equipment. We're talking about printmaking. It's like if you want to really be working on printmaking, don't you kind of need to like have a preps and stuff? You know, it's expensive equipment. Not that I don't spend plenty of money on watercolor supplies.
It's very easy to do.
It is like, oh, I could just use this brush. Somebody demoed with this brush. I want to try it. It's like a $60 brush, but you know, I'll do it.
And do you like treat yourself to a couple new colors if you go to the store too?
It's been very gracious in that I do make a little bit of money off of my artwork every year. And so our tax person keeps track of that. And so he's like, you know, if I buy a new brush that was like $60 brush or whatever, business expense. It's a business expense.
Nice. And so is the trip to the art store.
You're right. The gas.
Yes.
All right. Well, this is okay. This is way too light in relation to that now. Okay, let's see. Boy, that is not dark at all, is it? I'm gonna fix that. What time is it? 11? Okay. 30 minutes. They won't kick us out. What's that? They won't kick us out. Let me guys are going to leave. That first.
We'll watch. Yeah, we'll watch. We will go.
It's hard when you are used to spending like
Yes.
that amount of time on a painting to then try to come in and, you know, demonstrate something and get it to any point of being finished while you're talking about stuff that you're doing, right? We gotta really, these need to get darkened up big time. It's kind of nice. It's that like reflected light that I'm getting now. Oh,
Yeah. Really, it is nice.
I totally meant for that to happen.
It's fun when that happens.
It is fun, but then to having the trained eye to see when that happens Says, and then. You want to kind of leave it? I don't know. Okay, let's pump that color up here. Let's do this. It is good practice to kind of put a time constraint on your painting and say I'm going to try to sit down and do a painting in like an hour, because I think it forces your brain to think faster. That makes sense.
Or not overthink.
Or yeah, or not overthink, exactly.
Good point.
Your transitions are so smooth, the shading and everything. Do you attribute that to the amount that you're soaking the paper, or is it what the way the brush is, or is
I
it?
think it's both. I think it's the wet paper and the soft brush.
I'm sorry, the what paper?
Wet paper, the soft brush. I don't know. Trying to grab a couple of shadow in here. That is Pyro Red. All right. Trying to get these shadows. Sometimes to kind of, and this is going to sound weird, help you not like get stuck at all the tiny details, kind of throw my eyes out of focus. And I'm looking. Oh, make sure. That's what I'm doing now, trying to get those shadows in there. I do want to get these sharp shadows in there, show you how I get those in. I'm going to work on this first. Really wish I had pushed more yellow into this earlier. So this sharp shadow, I'm gonna be working a wash on dry paper, top to bottom. Mixing up my gray first. And I like to use these stiffer brushes for this one. All right, that's kind of a nice. Cooler, warmer. The trick is going to be having your brush wet enough so that you can maintain that bead of color. See how well this goes here. So we have that bead. I'm maintaining a bead at the bottom, even if I need to like drip more wet onto it. And then I have this more, it's going to shift cooler as it gets to the edge.
And would you put any of that red or orange in the shadow as well?
No. Well, maybe at some point, but not for this initial wash. It's really important to just keep moving and not fuss too much with it. So I really want to get a nice, smooth wash. This is where working on an angled surface becomes really important when I'm laying these washes here. Did I get that right? Yes, I did. And go back up here and fuss. Okay. This is already starting to soak in up there. You got to keep moving.
Too much red. It's okay.
So from back here, that shadow looks cool.
Oh yeah, this is really not stiff. I don't know.
So cool, yes.
It's cool, but the idea is that as it goes closer underneath of the tomatoes, it shifts slightly warm. It's all about like what colors it's next to, if that makes sense. So I got that nice little shadow in there. Wow. You see it better? Oh wait, this is really different up on the screen. Yeah. Don't take a picture of that. Here's another sharp shadow. Get that in.
many more layers will you put on the shadow?
So I probably once this is completely dry, I would work into it again and kind of intensify some things. This is where I would start going in and defining the pattern a little bit on the scarf. How much time do we have?
15.
15 more minutes? I'm not going to finish this paint. But I think what I will do, kind of shown what I wanted to show. I may go into the one I finished yesterday. Oh, that's getting messed up. So if something starts getting messed up and I'm starting to get blossoms, then sometimes you have to paint over the whole thing again. I think that helps a little bit. Let's try. See what I might do to go on with this one. So this is completely set in now, and I do want to kind of, I think there needs to be a little bit more shadows at the bottom of the tomato. So with the soft brush, I'm able to wet it down and not spread any of the pigment. And get some of that red, ultramarine blue, which seems to work well for red shadows for whatever reason. You know, I may want to soften this edge a little bit. So I'll wet that whole thing down. And maybe this would be a good place, like if there is some red reflections or something, now I can come in and kind of add that on top of the wash. Somebody had asked about that. Let's do a little bit more dark here.
How do you like to frame? What kind of glass?
So if I'm framing something, it's because I'm sending it to a show and you have to use plexiglass.
You do.
If you're shipping it, yes. So what I've started doing is I order from American Frame just because it's the cheapest for me. And better than sending it to a frame shop. I don't know why you do that, but they send a little kit, and because I have so many of my paintings a similar size, I can reuse the frame. So if something comes back from a show, and then I can reuse it for another show, and just pop the artwork out, or pop the new in.
Like wood frame or metal?
Metal usually. I don't know. Don't they have preferences like TWSA? Don't they say like metal frames or no metal? I don't know. Maybe they say no metal frames. And just they haven't like not had my painting up because it's in a metal frame. But all right, I'm gonna kind of intensify some of these patterns in the shadow a little bit. that's right. I was gonna soften. So this is still damp. So sometimes if I need to soften an edge, kind of do wet into wet, and then the slight dampness kind of spreads a little bit. What's that? I know, I'm getting really tired of painting tomatoes. I did that for the Illinois Watercolor Society. I was like, I don't really want to paint tomatoes ever again. Be easy, you know, but then I feel like I always pick colors that are hard to paint. I think red is hard to paint, bright red is hard to paint, yellow is hard to paint. I love painting yellow flowers. You can be frustrating as bad. Although now that I'm using that Hansa yellow, I think it really helps.
So what color do you shade your yellow flowers with?
So with that the yellow pansy one over there that was in the TWC, I did use cadmium pigments for that. Okay. And I felt because as soon as you wet it down again, like I do, it spreads the pigment. It's terrible. And so I worked a lot of that just in one wash. So then I'm starting with, I always build with the transparent yellow, and then I will shift to like the cadmium yellow light, cadmium yellow medium, and then mix a little bit of cadmium red into it and just kind of build all in one wash so I don't have to go over it. If you're doing shadows, the best way to do shadows for yellow, and this is where the Hansa yellow has really been a great asset for me because I don't think it lifts as much as the cadmium pigment. I will use this same method and laying a transparent wash on top of the yellow. You just have to keep it light. And sometimes it's even better to just have like start with the aureolin yellow and then kind of, you know, so like I have this kind of a thing going on my palette, but I'm primarily starting with the yellow, and then as I reach towards the edge, the wash shifts more cool with the blue and the purple. It shadows on the yellow I think are best done glazing on top of it with the transparent. But this is, like I said, I've had many paintings get ruined because of the cadmium, and then I go in to add the shadows on top, and it spreads, it lifts the cadmium pigment underneath and just makes a mess. And that's why I started using the Hansa yellow medium, because I feel like it doesn't do that as much. I don't know why. All yellows I feel like have some level of opacity to them if you lay them on too heavily, but that seems to be more transparent than cadmium. How much time do I have left? Do I have a lot of time left?
It's like 7 or 8 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll just keep working on this one. My husband's like, so you should do this like a cooking show where you have like what you're working on and then you have the finish.
Oh,
Put your brush down.
well, this is the one I did yesterday.
Yeah, this is the one I did under not as much pressure. Although I think we did spend about the same amount of time, honestly. But when you're talking, you know, but that's okay.
You're not listening to what your head says.
Exactly.
60 people in front of you.
Yeah, that's kind of intimidating. What else can I develop here? I don't know if I don't want to overwork it, right? And this is where using this is helpful when I get to the end stages. Like, what else do I need to really do? And I thought about that with the last painting that I worked on, and I thought, you know, maybe I need to just develop it a little bit more than I do my other painting. You work on it a little bit longer. And what I found is that like, cause I would take pictures, you know, I take a picture, work on it a little bit more, take a picture, and it really wasn't adding or taking away from the composition at all. And I think at that point, then the piece is finished. Cause you can keep working and working and working, but then at some point, the details that you're adding aren't really adding any to composition. So then why are we still working? You know? And I really don't look forward to this one.
That's gorgeous.
Thank you. It turned out like this one would get there eventually, you know.
And stars, without the background, it's still amazing.
So very kind. Yeah, and the other thing is like the floral pattern on the fabric, I don't really sit there and agonize over. You know, that's one of those detail things. Like some of it is important. There's a painting I did recently over there at that pink dress, and there's a lot of complex patterns on that fabric, and it's best to just simplify. And there's some areas you develop a little bit more, and like you've heard people say, your eye kind of will fill in the blanks. You know, what's your focal point? That's where the detail's important. The other stuff you don't need to agonize as much over. I think I'm gonna be done.